South Asia. So I'm happy to welcome you here. Thank you so much for coming. And I have the honor of introducing David Barsamian, who is the award-winning founder and director of Alternative Radio. That's the independent weekly audio series based in Boulder, Colorado. And David is the author of numerous books with Noam Chomsky, Zinn, Eqbal Ahmad, Tariq Ali, Arundhati, Uprisings, and more. His best-selling books with Chomsky have been translated in many languages. His latest books are How the World Works and What We Say Goes. That's with Noam Chomsky. And Targeting Iran. David's interviews and articles appear in the Progressive, Z, and other publications. He is the winner of the Media Education Award, that's the ACLU's Upton Sinclair Award for Independent Journalism, and the Cultural Freedom Free Fellowship from the Lannan Foundation, the Institute for International Journalism, named him one of his top 10 media heroes. So with further ado, please let me turn over to David.
Comrades, brothers and sisters, good evening. Good to see you. Thank you for coming. I just wanted to make sure that you understood from the introduction that wasn't the Lenin Foundation that honored me with that fellowship. It was the Lannan Foundation. Although some people think I should get some kind of award from Lenin.
For Bolshevism.
And thank you all for organizing this event on rather short notice. Alternative radio, I want to tell you a little bit about it because you can't hear it here in the most liberal city in the United States because the two major national public radio stations, WBUR and WGBH, reflecting kind of the timidity that is now so predominant in US media, refuse to air my weekly one-hour program, which features, incidentally, many voices that happen to be based right here in the Boston area. It's kind of ironic, particularly with my work with Chomsky and Howard Zinn, Holly Sklar, Chip Burley, Chuck Collins, a number of local activists. And you'd think that GBH and BUR would want to air alternative radio, which is offered to all stations free of charge. So they can't say, we don't have a budget, or we respect and admire what you're doing, but we don't have the money to pay for it. When I started alternative radio by myself in Boulder, Colorado in 1986, 26 years ago, I decided to offer this program free of charge to all public and community radio stations in the United States and around the world, because I knew I was dealing with politically challenging, politically explosive material. And I didn't want to give stations the excuse to say, that we can't run it because of budgetary reasons. And so Boston, like other cities around the US, does not air alternative radio. Just to correct it though, there are two tiny college stations that do air alternative radio. Tufts in Medford, and if you live in the immediate Medford area, you can hear it on Saturday mornings. And the other station is the BC College station on Sunday mornings. They have small signals. They do not cover the Boston area at all. So if you just happen to be in that listening area, you can pick it up. And so every week, there are programs with Bill Moyers, Helen Caldecott, Arun Gupta, who's a brilliant South Asian voice who's based in New York. I've had him on 3 times already, talking about the Tea Party, about Occupy Wall Street and other issues. Brilliant voice. I urge you to get him here to speak. Jody Evans of Code Pink, Russell Means, the great Native American leader. So the list is all here. You can see the programs. I just did a big program with Tariq Ali, a 2-part series. Arundhati Roy, since I began alternative radio, I've always had Arundhati on, Vandana Shiva, Nandini Sundar, a lot of voices you may not hear from South Asia, Siddharth Varadarajan, and from Pakistan, Pervez Hoodboy, Fatima Bhutto, Isa Dawood Kota, Najma Sadiq of a wonderful women's group in Pakistan called Shirkatgah, again a group that I hope you know about and would support. And today, this afternoon, I interviewed Bina Sarwar, a Pakistani journalist who's based here in the Boston area. She files reports for the news. She was a long-time contributor to GOTV and an old friend from Karachi. So that was just today. A couple of weeks ago, I did an interview with Mohammed Junaid, who is a Kashmiri graduate student at the City University of New York. He teaches at Lehman College. A very articulate, very brilliant young voice from Kashmir. And that, incidentally, is one of the 2 CDs that I have brought. It's an interview called Inside Kashmir, and the other is with Arundhati Roy called Revolts and Rebellions. I don't have to tell this audience, but maybe for the non-Indians who are here, that South Asia is in tremendous tumult right now. There's just a number of upheavals and revolts and rebellions, particularly in India. One's on the fringes, as Arundhati Roy says, that is to say in Manipur, Nagaland in the northeast, Kashmir in the north. Those struggles and those energies have migrated now to the very center of India, where there's major revolts against rule from Delhi. More about that in a little bit. But I wanted to actually talk to you a little bit about Martin Luther King Jr. and see if I can connect that with South Asia and with India. Monday was the national holiday of Dr. Martin Luther King, and almost like clockwork, National Public Radio, PBS, they all broadcast the I Have a Dream speech, which is a marvelous bit of poetry. You all know it and have heard it, no doubt, recorded in August of 1963. It's a curious choice that the corporate media and the state agencies make in choosing to focus on that particular Martin Luther King speech and not the ones that would come later, which had a race, class, gender, and anti-imperialist message. That Martin Luther King is obscured in many ways, reflecting what states do all over the world. They use the media to craft a particular message that they want to project. We see that in how India manages the Kashmir issue, for example, or some of the other internal struggles in the country, such as Chhattisgarh. If I were talking about Dr. Martin Luther King and I saw his photograph as I came in to the building, and I think he's with Mahatma Gandhi, if I'm not mistaken. Of course, he went to India in 1959. He was very much influenced by Gandhian nonviolence and theories of civil disobedience, and had mentioned that. But I think the Martin Luther King we should pay attention to, particularly, is not the one frozen on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in August 1963, but the radical revolutionary Martin Luther King Jr. of Riverside Church in New York on April 4th, 1967. If you read that speech today, it is one of the most extraordinary, not just examples of oratorical brilliance, which is almost redundant when you're talking about King because he was such a great speaker, but the depth of the analysis and its, I would use the word ferocity in its attack on US imperialism. It was, of course, at the height of the Vietnam War. If you read the speech today and just put Afghanistan or Pakistan or Somalia or Yemen or any of the other countries that the US is bombing or occupying, you will see that this speech speaks to us today when King said, and this was given, by the way, exactly a year to the day he was killed in Memphis. This was in New York on April 4th, 67. April 4th, 68, he was killed in Memphis. The greatest purveyor of violence in the world today is the United States. A time comes when silence is betrayal, and that time has come for us now. A few years ago, there was a shining moment in struggle. It seemed as if there were a real promise of hope for the poor. There were experiments, hopes, new beginnings. Then came the war, and I watched this program broken and eviscerated. A society gone mad on war. And then he talks about what compassion is. True compassion is more than flinging a coin at a beggar. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. The war in Vietnam is but a symptom of a far deeper malady within the American spirit, and we ignore this sobering reality. And if we do, we will find ourselves organizing again around Guatemala and Peru, Thailand, Cambodia, Mozambique, and other countries. We will be marching for these and a dozen other names and attending rallies without end, unless there's a significant and profound change in American life and policy. And then he went on to say, those who make peaceful revolution impossible by refusing to give up the privileges and pleasures that come from immense profits of overseas investments, they will be challenged. I am convinced if we are to get on the right side of world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. And what was that radical revolution of values that he talked about? We have to shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives and property rights are considered more important than people, then the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. A true revolution of values will look uneasily on the glaring contrasts of poverty and wealth. I mean, this sounds like Occupy Wall Street, doesn't it? The glaring inequalities of poverty and wealth. And with wars going on, you know, in the background, dark-skinned people being bombed and killed. They're called out, you know, to say a few lines, and then they're supposed to go backstage again, you know, while the master dominates the discourse and knows what's best for the natives, of course, in true colonial fashion. With righteous indignation, a revolution of values will look across the seas and see capitalists of the West investing huge sums of money in Asia, Africa, and South America, only to take the profits out. Now, I don't know, no one here is old enough to remember that particular period, but the reaction to this speech was truly instructive. The US corporate media and the president at that time went ballistic. Johnson, according to Lyndon Johnson, who was president in 1967, when he heard about what King had said, went into a racist tirade denouncing the nigger preacher who didn't appreciate all that Johnson had done for him and his people. You know, I mean, just hear the patronizing language. And then the corporate media, not to be left behind, Time magazine said King's speech sounded as if it were written in Hanoi. And comments in the Washington Post and the New York Times were of a similar nature, totally ignoring his message and talking about, you know, well, America is at war, we should support our troops, yada, yada, yada. The same kind of BS that's going on today, you know. So as they say in French, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Now he gave one other presentation, and that was the night before he died. And this is like an Occupy Wall Street speech. April 3rd, 1968, in Memphis, Tennessee. I think you might know the speech because the only part that's ever broadcast is, "I may not get there with you to the promised land, but we as a people are going to get there one day." You know? So he was actually prophesizing his own death. I mean, he somehow sensed that he was going to be killed. But the other part of the speech, of course, goes down Orwell's memory hole. Again, too inconvenient to remember. Let's just remember the beautiful rhetoric and play that also on his death anniversary or on his birthday. So this speech, which was given in support of striking sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee, in solidarity with them. It was a meeting organized by one of the biggest labor unions in Memphis, well, in the United States, the AFSCME. AFSCME is the acronym. And King, if you remember, also was about to launch a Poor People's Campaign. In Washington, D.C., there was a tent city, and King was going to go from Memphis, after supporting the striking sanitation workers, go to Washington and organize a major march of poor people. Again, this is what, 45 years before Occupy Wall Street. And he said, he stressed to solve problems in this speech, it means we've got to stay together. We've got to maintain unity. The issue is injustice. The issue is the refusal of the city of Memphis to be fair and honest in its dealings with its public servants, who happen to be sanitation workers, and he didn't say because it was obvious, overwhelmingly African American. And this is where we are today in the human rights revolution. If something isn't done and in a hurry to bring the peoples of the world out of their long years of poverty, their long years of hurt and neglect, the whole world is doomed. Now, the other thing we'll have to do is this, he says, always anchor our external direct action with the power of economic withdrawal. This is extraordinary. He's talking about boycotts, very much as Occupy Wall Street is talking about boycotts. We're asking you tonight, he said, to go out and tell your neighbors not to buy Coca-Cola, not to buy Wonder Bread, and not to buy Seal Test milk. I call upon you to take your money out of the banks. This is all decades ago. And then, of course, he ends with that incredible, stirring speech where he foresees his own demise. So I think, you know, there is a connection there with how states try to impose an ideological framework so that people are limited in their understanding of particular issues. So in the case of Martin Luther King, keep him on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, that's just great. Let's be virtuous and beat our chests about, you know, horrible Alabama sheriffs like Bull Connor and using whips and blowing up churches. We can all be virtuous about that. But stay away from any message about imperialism or capitalism or, you know, racism and gender bias and those particular issues. I've just got a piece that was published today in the Socialist Worker. I know all your subscriptions have lapsed to the Socialist Worker. You probably all read it, every single issue. So I'm going to read this and, you know, probably ad-lib a little bit. As you can see, I'm getting to ad-libbing. And it's called Journalism and Occupation. It's about the challenges faced by those who seek to report about Kashmir. For obvious reasons, freedom of the press in Kashmir is limited and constrained. By the way, can I see from a show of hands how many have been to Indian administered Kashmir? Come, 3 people, okay. Military occupation with its attendant curfews, roadblocks, checkpoints, searches, surveillance, wiretapping of calls and emails, and state-sponsored violence, from custodial deaths and extrajudicial killings to torture and disappearances, produce immense pain and suffering among Kashmiris. Intimidation and fear are widespread. That is the intent, design, and logic of occupation, of any occupation, whether it's the US occupation of Iraq or Afghanistan or the Israeli occupation of Palestine. It has a certain intent and logic to control, to intimidate, and instill fear into the hearts of the population. I remember driving around in Kashmir, in the valley, and there are many military, the whole valley, by the way, is just crisscrossed with multiple Indian Army bases, posts, intelligence gathering centers. It's kind of a euphemism where torture is carried out, and other checkpoints, and you're stopped all the time. But when a military convoy comes by, and you're in a car, it is absolutely imperative that you pull over to the side of the road and wait. And so I asked my friend P.J. Rasool, an independent Kashmiri journalist, like, what's going on? And he said, ye sahab ki gadi hai. This is the master's, cars, and we have to stop and pull over to the side of the road. And then I said, oh, what? Kya hota? And he said, they will shoot us. They will or arrest us. So imagine life in that kind of situation. The uprising and resistance, So we talked about intimidation and fear are widespread. That is the intent and design and logic of occupation. In such a repressive and oppressive atmosphere, people are reluctant to speak freely and provide information to journalists. And journalists do not have freedom of movement to report stories. Occupation nourishes and sustains a climate of timidity, paranoia, and intense psychological distress. There have been studies of Kashmiris who are in mental institutions or are in some kind of a program where they're getting psychiatric care. There's a direct correlation between that very large number of people and the occupation. They're worried, they have nightmares about their house being broken in, their loved ones being disappeared, and the like. The uprising and resistance in Kashmir to Indian rule is one of the major news stories in the world, yet it is underreported. It's an interesting kind of observation, which I think is correct. You may know that in 2008, now 4 years ago, there was a Tahrir Square in Srinagar before there was a Tahrir Square in Cairo. But we heard all about what happened in Cairo, but virtually nothing about what happened in Srinagar. And again, that goes to the brilliant propaganda strategies of the Indian state to control the message, ignoring the fact that this was a nonviolent, peaceful demonstration, always attaching the word or injecting words such as Taliban, Al-Qaeda, terrorists, Muslim fundamentalists, always preceding the noun Kashmir, so making that link in public consciousness. The Indian state has been diligent in framing and manufacturing the news messages coming from Kashmir. It has broken the window panes, literally, and hearts all over besieged Kashmir. In addition to a series of draconian laws, which are imposed arbitrarily and without any legal recourse, there is a campaign of censoring and controlling journalists. There are a number of laws that India uses to control Kashmir. The most notorious is the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, AFSPA, which was introduced in, I believe, in Manipur in 1958. Someone is nodding their head. And is still in force today. And there's a whole series of other laws which allow for indefinite detention. Incidentally, not very unlike the recent bill which the Change You Can Believe in president signed just a couple of weeks ago, the Defense Authorization Bill, which has given now the chief executive, that is the president, the right to hold people that he deems are threats or potential threats indefinitely and subject them to military tribunals. You'll also recall that the Change You Can Believe in president also announced when he was in India in November of 2010 that this was a strategic partnership that was growing and was going to be very, very important in the 21st century. He showed his importance by selling $5 billion of weapons to a country that has more hunger than all of sub-Saharan Africa combined. But that's another story, isn't it? Another issue complicating the functioning of journalists is the vast network of state spies who deliberately spread disinformation and rumors. In addition, the Indian state directly deports journalists. If they are already in Kashmir, as in the case of John Halpern, an independent New York-based filmmaker, he was kicked out of Srinagar. He was staying on a houseboat. Security forces came in the middle of the night and told him, you're leaving in the morning. And they put him on a plane and confiscated his film. He was shooting a documentary in Kashmir. I don't believe that was reported here in the, I did a pretty intensive search and I didn't see a single mention of that. Imagine if a designated enemy state like North Korea or Syria or Libya under Gaddafi or Iran, of course, Iran, the #1 demon now in the world. If an American or European journalist were deported from Iran, I think you might hear about it here in the media. Why? Because there are propaganda points to be made. This demonstrates the evilness of the Iranian regime, that they don't believe in freedom of the press. That was the case of John Halpern. Then there was also Gautam Nolaka, who I believe has spoken here, marvelous journalist, a human rights activist, a member of the International People's Tribunal on Kashmir. He arrives, he's an Indian national, okay, so forget about John Halpern now. He arrives in Srinagar last May and is not allowed out of the airport and is sent back to Delhi. And the case, of course, at the international airports. You may have heard that I was deported from Indira Gandhi International Airport in late September of last year. I had a valid visa in my passport. I arrived, and I've been going to India since 1966. One of the things that I have in my introduction is that in my spare time I like to listen. I listen and read Urdu poetry and listen and play Indian ragas. So I have a long cultural connection with India, not just a political one. There's a deep cultural tie. I have deep cultural ties with the country and its culture. So I was turned back. No reason was given. It's a very scary situation. I don't recommend it to anyone here. First of all, you get to pay for your own deportation, which turns out to be pretty expensive. And in this case, I had treated myself to a business class ticket from Denver. So it was not just a financial loss. I was totally demoralized, bewildered. What's going on? I couldn't get an explanation. And I was almost, immediately I thought, it's got to be connected to Kashmir. What else could it be? I mean, I've been reporting on the Narmada Bachao Andolan, the movement to stop the big dams, on Chhattisgarh, on Orissa, on the pogrom against Muslims in Gujarat, a whole series of issues. But Kashmir has a particular, it's a third rail in India and with the Indian state. They are hypersensitive to it in the same way that China is hypersensitive whenever the issue of Tibet comes up. They go nuts. They become completely irrational, you know, and so I think Kashmir represents that in the imagination of elements in the Indian state. So there I was pulled aside, you know, come with us please, again a phrase you never want to hear, and a piece of paper was waved in my face and I could see my name, the Lufthansa flight number, and the word banned. I wasn't allowed to read the paper, but I saw that when, you know, he kind of waved it in my face, and I said, you know, I said, well, can I have an explanation? And you know, and he was very polite, young guy, you know, doing his job. He said, you know, we have an order from the Home Ministry. You're on a banned list. 3 weeks before I had arrived at the same airport, May Aquino, a prominent human rights activist from the Philippines, was also denied entry at New Delhi airport. This is the world's largest democracy. I've been to Pakistan multiple times, Syria, Egypt under Mubarak, Turkey under military dictatorship, and other countries, Iran under the Ahmadinejad regime, and had no problems. But in the world's largest democracy, I was encountering this kind of censorship and control. And to this day, no explanation has been given from the Indian government, despite letters being written, a petition signed by very prominent Indian scholars, activists, documentary filmmakers, economists, and others, you know, demanding an explanation and asking that the Indian government allow me to back into the country. And the response to this, letters from Matthew Rothschild of the Progressive Magazine and others, Noam Chomsky, absolute silence. So I asked Arundhati Roy about this, and she says, welcome to India. This is what they do to people who dissent. They try to ignore you as long as possible and will only respond under extreme duress. You know, if this becomes something of a major, you know, international embarrassment. And so my deportation here, you'll be surprised, was not covered by ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, and Fox and all the rest, or any of the, or National Public Radio. It was not, but only on community radio stations and a few magazines such as The Progressive and Z Magazine had some commentary about it. So it didn't hit the criticality that's required for a state to respond. So I'm very pessimistic about the possibility of my getting back into India anytime soon. And there's also the ominous example of Richard Shapiro, someone who I hope you know his name. He's a scholar. He's also the partner of Angana Chatterjee, who is an author, a sociologist. She wrote a book called Violent Gods about Hindutva, Hindu nationalism in Orissa and in other parts of India. He and his wife, his partner, Angana, went to India on November 1st, 2010. Now, she is an Indian national. She is stopped every time and questioned and detained, but ultimately they let her in the country because they can't deny her entry with an Indian citizenship. Not so lucky for Richard, who was denied entry, sent back to the United States on the same flight that he arrived on. And now, you know, a year and a quarter has passed, and he too has received no word from the Indian government as to why he was prevented from entering the country and when might he be allowed to get back in. I'll talk more about Angana Chatterjee and her work in a few moments. Of course, if journalists report on Kashmir within the conventional government framework, that framework that I mentioned, these are a few Pakistani-inspired terrorists, Muslim fundamentalists. They're khuni. They're just murderers, qatil. They just kill for killing's sake. Then it's okay. That kind of reporting is to be applauded. And as I say here, you'll probably be garlanded with malas. In late November, just a couple of months ago, I visited the Committee to Protect Journalists in New York, and I learned that the top countries in which journalists experience the most difficulty in working in, 5 are in South Asia: Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and India. Pakistan is at the top of the list, where journalists are routinely killed or tortured or disappeared. But then the representative from the Committee to Protect Journalists in New York told me that India is now 13 on this list and is moving up rapidly. My case just being one of many. I mean, I'm okay. My fingernails weren't pulled out, my ribs weren't broken. I returned in one piece. So I was relatively privileged. Other people are not so lucky. An unimpeded free press is essential to the functioning of democracy. In reporting on Kashmir and other conflict areas, journalists, in addition to being deported, are threatened, harassed, and in some cases beaten, as happened recently in Kashmir. A couple of journalists were beaten by the security forces. As long as the Indian state continues to portray the struggle for freedom in Kashmir as an expression of Pakistani-driven terrorism and deny the aspirations of most Kashmiris and their right to self-determination, then the people of India and the rest of the world will never understand what fuels Kashmir's discontent with Indian rule. They will be mystified and bewildered. Why are the natives so unhappy? Kashmir is packaged in a public relations campaign as a magical tourist destination where middle-class Indians escape the heat of the plains in the summer, stroll in Shalimar Gardens, stay on houseboats, and enjoy shikara rides across Dal Lake. And in winter, pretend that they are in Switzerland as they frolic in the snow. There's a wonderful scene in Sanjay Kak's brilliant documentary on Kashmir. Have any of you seen it? Few of you, yeah. Jashan Azadi, How We Celebrate Freedom. So he goes up to Gulmarg, which is this resort, ski resort outside of Srinagar, and shows exactly that, the wonderful time they're having sledding and playing in the snow and throwing snowballs. Bollywood's portrayal of Kashmir in films tends to reinforce cliches from romantic visions to the other extreme, jihadi fanatics who have nothing better to do than lust for blood. These stereotypical images are light years away from the brutal and harsh realities faced by average Kashmiris every day of their lives. The fare offered by Indian TV talking heads replicates the US Fox network news model. Obfuscate, mislead, traduce, slander, fabricate, and most of all, yell. Yell as loud as you can. Asna Goswami is one of those that I'm thinking of. And these are the people that are constantly questioning of the loyalty and the patriotism of any Indian who speaks out, particularly about Kashmir, but other issues as well. They are called curiously anti-Indian, which is curious because they are Indian. It's like when you hear that same charge leveled here against Americans, being anti-American. It's bizarre, to say the least. Real journalism should go where the silences are. It should go into the darkest corners and shine light into them. It should be fearless and courageous. It should be uncovering the mass graves which dot Kashmir. It should be focusing on massive human rights violations, collective punishment, custodial deaths. How many of you know that India leads the world in this ignominious category of custodial deaths? I never heard of this term until I started going to Kashmir. I didn't know what it meant. I never encountered it, like I never encountered encounters the way it's used in the South Asian lexicon. You know, so or the term half-widow in Kashmir. That is to say, I said, well, what does that mean? I mean, how can you be a half-widow? Well, there are 8,000 to 10,000 Kashmiris, almost all of them men, who have gone missing. And of course now there's a lot of speculation that the mass graves that are being uncovered, over 2,000 so far, are in fact where those Kashmiri missing are buried, interred. So what does it mean to be a half-widow? I had to ask. Since the death of your spouse or brother or whoever the male is in your family cannot be determined, you have no death certificate, then we cannot provide any kind of compensation or benefits to you. So these women, overwhelmingly women, are in this kind of psychological limbo. I mean, they don't know. I mean, what should they do? Should they remarry? You know, in some instances, people have been missing for 10, 15, 20 years. So half-widows, encounters, fake encounters. Okay, you think, what is an encounter? Well, it sounds like a great thing. You meet somebody. But in the South Asian context, it is usually when state security forces shoot someone and then plant evidence, convenient evidence, which, like letters from Osama bin Laden saying, carry on with your great jihad, kill as many Hindus as you possibly can, and then, cell phone numbers in Pakistan, all kinds of things, documents from the Taliban in Pakistan, and Lashkar-e-Jangi and Lashkar-e-Taiba and other groups. Very conveniently, these documents are fine. Like these guys, if you were doing any kind of counterinsurgency, you would not carry any identification. I don't know if any people here have been in the military, but you would not in any way identify yourself because it would expose your sources. They just simply wouldn't do it. So encounters is another thing. Custodial deaths. People taken into custody by state security forces and then mysteriously die. They choke on their chicken wing, or they're somehow pushed out of jump out of a window and meet an untimely death. So India leads the world in this category of custodial deaths. As I said, journalism should be uncovering the mass graves dotting Kashmir. Should be focusing on these issues, collective punishment. Collective punishment is really frightening. I don't know if any of you have ever been in a situation. It is illegal under international law, also clearly part of the Geneva Conventions. That is to say, an entire village, a town, or city is put under curfew, is blockaded. You cannot go in and out because the state security forces think, well, there's a miscreant in that town or village, and so we're going to protect, we're going to punish the entire town, village, or city. So that goes on frequently. Most recently, actually, just a week ago, it's been a particularly brutally cold winter in Kashmir this year, and one of the curious things that goes on there is the looting of Kashmiri hydroelectric and water resources by the Indian state. So, if any of you have been to the Ambience Mall in Vasant Kunj? Anyone? No. That's the future of the part of India that has seceded from India. An amazing experience. I really recommend it. I mean, I felt like an anthropologist when I was walking around there. It's a 3-story building, totally air conditioned. In fact, you're freezing. You have to wear a shawl, to stay warm. And what were the shops there? It was Gucci, Versace, Yves Saint Laurent, all of the leading brands, Chanel, from Europe and the United States, in this, palace of glitz and symbol of wealth, and the kind of India that Thomas Friedman never seems to tire of praising and lauding, because that's the India he knows. He knows that India, the India of call centers in Gurgaon and Cyberabad and Bangalore and these, entrepreneurial IT geniuses. That's the India that he celebrates. He doesn't know anything and has written nothing about what is actually going on, let's say, in POSCO, in Orissa, where there's a huge movement to resist the South Korean steel plant, or what had gone on in the Narmada Valley, or what is going on in Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh, in Jharkhand, and in other parts of the country. Amazing this is one type of corporate journalism. And he always appears on Charlie Rose and National Public Radio as an expert on India. Journalism should investigate war crimes. Oh, I'm sorry, I interrupted myself. So what happened a couple of weeks ago during this brutally cold weather? Huge parts of Srinagar had no electricity. There was no heat, and people were freezing. And so, meanwhile, Delhi is lit up, and they know that. 30% of the hydroelectric power from Kashmir is sent to North India, primarily to so that Defense Colony and Greater Kailash 1 and 2 can be brightly lit 24/7, while Kashmiris freeze in the dark. So there was a demonstration. People didn't like it, and the security forces opened fire, and someone was killed. Then what happened? A curfew was imposed on that town that had demonstrated. Collective punishment. So not only are they freezing in the dark, they cannot move in and out, kids can't go to school, people can't get medicine. This is considered a war crime under international law, collective punishment. It's as if someone came from Belmont or Auburndale and came into Cambridge, and stole a car and went back to Auburndale, and then the state security forces imposed a curfew on the entire city of Auburndale to punish it for this, whatever this one person has allegedly done. Real journalism should investigate war crimes and name the members of the security forces, intelligence agencies, and officials in Srinagar and Delhi who are responsible. It should be in an adversarial relationship with power. To be invited to have tea with Chief Minister Umar Abdullah or dosa with Home Minister P. Chidambaram is a sign of journalists failing their duty, not fulfilling their duty. I mean, I would be embarrassed if Hillary Clinton called me and invited me to lunch. I'm thinking, what am I doing wrong? How have I compromised my principles? But people like Thomas Friedman and David Brooks, and the other pundits that control our kind of the official opinion in the United States, they think nothing. They feel no shame at all that, the president's invited me to play tennis with him, and we hung out and had a drink, we had a beer afterwards. They think, oh, this is great. This is what, we're getting the inside scoop. The reason people in power call any journalist is to control the message, is to leak information that they want to be circulated. It's not about, exposing the truth. So it's not simply a problem of Indian journalism, and I've tried to inject that here a few times. It's a problem here in the world's second largest democracy as well, where too many of our media people are led by the nose and are simply stenographers to power. That's what they're doing. They're doing stenography, not journalism. This is embedded journalism at its worst. Why? Because state officials want to seduce journalists with access to power and manipulate the flow of information through leaks, half-truths, and lies. The classic aphorism which historically informed US journalism. This is what journalism students learn in school. This should be their motto. And what is that motto? Comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Well, I mean, that sounds great, right? You put the heat on those who are comfortable, the rich and powerful, and you provide sympathy for those who are most vulnerable in the society. Here, as in India, to a large extent, that has been totally flipped. Now, the journalism as practiced here, in the corporate journalism in particular, in India as well, comfort the comfortable, afflict the afflicted. Why are the poor poor? Because they're lazy. They don't want to work. Now, do you see these crazy right-wing people talking about food stamps? You know, that so many people are on food stamps. Why are people on food stamps? Because there's hunger in the country. Why is there hunger in the United States? Because there's no work. 25 million people are out of work. So this is considered, let's see, people are being labeled as morally culpable because they're going for food stamp assistance. You know, again, blaming the victims, not talking about a capitalist economic system which cannot provide work when there is much work to do by any account, to millions of people who want to work. Let's not talk about that. Let's talk about gay marriage. Let's talk about, you know, abortion and those kind of burning the flag issues, the so-called social value issues. Let's talk about, you know, in God we trust, etc. Constant focus on a few rotten apples in the barrel, but never the barrel itself. So when it comes to capitalism, you know, it's Bernie Madoff, it's these horrible, unscrupulous Wall Street businessmen who have, you know, deceived their clients. It's never talking about the system that produces these kinds of things. I mean, any medical people here? It's constantly dealing with symptoms. The diagnosis is never at the root cause that produces these symptoms. It's only focusing on the symptoms. So all the approaches are Band-Aid approaches. They are, because they're not systemic approaches. They're not structural. And so they're doomed to failure. And that's why we have one economic crisis after another, in greater and greater frequency, particularly in the world's second largest democracy. Journalists who curry favor, I thought I'd put curry in there, give it a little masala. Journalists who curry favor and approval from higher-ups are chamchas. I originally wrote this for Kashmir Wala. Chamcha is a lackey in Indian slang. So I originally wrote this for a Kashmir-based blog, and it was picked up by the Socialist Worker today, as a matter of fact. So they're currying favors. These are chamcha, they're lackeys. Chamcha is literally a spoon. They are experts in makari, hypocrisy, and have sold themselves for career advancement. Access to ministers in Delhi or corporate bigwigs in Mumbai are signs of their moral corruption and desire to get ahead at the expense of reporting the truth. Thus, they are lapdogs with laptops, and in most instances, become de facto instruments of the state and conveyor belts of propaganda. Even with all the difficulties I have cited above, some of the bravest journalists I know are Kashmiri. I mentioned P.G. Rasool, there's also Ejaz Hussain, there's also Pervez Bukhari, with whom I've done a program, and Sanjay Kak and others who are doing remarkable journalism under extremely difficult conditions. They cut through the layers of barbed wire and report the facts without fear or favor. I am proud to know them. One of the good things that happened on September 23rd was when I was deported. The only good thing, I think, was I picked up this copy of the Mail Today. It's an Indian tabloid. And of course, my eye immediately fell on this particular page called Traveler. This is about Chhattisgarh, which means 36 forts in Hindi. It's a fairly new state. It was carved out of Madhya Pradesh in the year 2000. It is the site of a major Maoist rebellion right now, largely driven by an Adivasi population, that is to say indigenous people, who have been thrown off their lands, have been driven into strategic hamlets like the US did to the Vietnamese, and literally into roadside camps, or have fled to neighboring states. What is the crime of these people? Well, they have committed a serious crime. They do not understand the demands and needs of corporate capitalism to exploit and to loot resources. They happen to be sitting on enormous amounts of iron ore, manganese, forest products, that is to say, timber, worth billions and billions of dollars. But there's a significant amount of bauxite and coal as well in Orissa. In Chhattisgarh. In Orissa, the bauxite, which is what you make aluminum from, it's estimated that the bauxite there is worth $4 trillion, and it is mostly on indigenous land. So the people there also don't understand what is their role. They are to disappear because they are unpeople, because they are indigenous, they are Adivasi. And they are to allow progress of the Indian state to proceed unimpeded for the greater good, but for the profit of a handful of corporations. In the case of Orissa, it's a South Korean steel mill that's going up there. So Chhattisgarh, there's a major rebellion there, and Roy has written about it in this book, Walking with the Comrades. I've got a couple of copies here. So what do we learn about Chhattisgarh? It has all the pluses of a tourist hotspot, but it gets a bad press. Gee, I wonder why. The state is now ready to roll out a marketing blitz to set the record straight and cash in on its natural wealth. And there's a picture here of a huge waterfall, which they're comparing to Niagara Falls. The tourism minister of Chhattisgarh says, the state just gets 25,000 foreign tourists. Why is that? Because of all the bad publicity that Chhattisgarh is receiving. To get those numbers up, the tourism board has rolled out a 6-month campaign powered by a war chest of rupees 7 crore. I don't know how much that'll be in dollars, but it's a lot of money in one of the most impoverished